Travis Holloway's calloused fingers clutched the crumpled dollar bill as the auctioneer's hammer came down with a resounding crack. "Sold to the cowboy in the back." The words echoed through the dusty barn, sealing a fate that would change to lives forever. He had just bought a human being, a young woman named Elsie. Brightwater with his last dollar in the world. The year was 1884. The small farming community of Cedar Ridge, Montana, operated by its own harsh rules. When Silas Brightwater died of consumption, leaving behind massive debts and a daughter with no family, the creditors had gathered like vultures. According to the territory's debt laws, Elsie could be sold into indentured servitude to pay her father's obligations. Travis pushed through the crowd of leering men who had been bidding on the auburn-haired girl standing on the makeshift platform. Her green eyes blazed with defiance despite the tears threatening to spill. Her chin held high even as her worn calico dress trembled with each breath. She was 19, beautiful in a way that made men stupid, and completely alone in the world. "You bought me," Elsie said when Travis approached, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "What do you intend to do with me?" Travis studied her face, seeing the intelligence behind her fear. He was 26, weathered by years of working cattle ranches and mining claims, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm. "Clouds, I intend to give you a choice," he said quietly. "Work for me until the debt is paid, or I can try to find you passage somewhere else." The crowd was dispersing, disappointed they hadn't witnessed the usual spectacle of a purchased woman being dragged away in tears. Elsie's eyes narrowed as she studied this unexpected buyer. "You spent your last dollar on me. I heard you counting your money before the bidding started." Travis shrugged, embarrassed she'd noticed. "Maybe I did." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment, then helped her down from the platform with surprising gentleness. "Every person deserves better than being sold like livestock. Even if I can't give you much, I can give you dignity." As they walked toward his battered wagon outside, Elsie felt something shift inside her chest. This man, this stranger who had bankrupted himself for a principle, was nothing like the men who had been eyeing her with hungry stares. His clothes were patched but clean, his boots worn but polished. He carried himself with quiet confidence, not the swagger of someone trying to prove something. "What's your name?" she asked as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "Travis Holloway. I've got a small spread about 5 miles north of here. It's not much, a cabin, some pasture land, and about 30 head of cattle. But it's honest work." Elsie nodded, studying his profile as he gathered the reins. "Mr. Holloway, what exactly did you buy today?" Travis met her gaze directly. "I bought your debt, Miss Brightwater. Nothing more. What happens next is up to both of us." The Holloway homestead was exactly what Travis had described, modest, but maintained with obvious care. In a small valley protected by pine-covered hills, with a clear stream running nearby and pastures where cattle grazed peacefully, Elsie felt something inside her relax for the first time in weeks. "There's a room in the back," Travis said, unloading her meager belongings from the wagon. "It's small, but it has a window and a lock on the door. The lock is for your peace of mind, not mine." Elsie followed him inside, surprised by the cabin's interior. Books lined shelves along one wall, and everything was clean and organized. A pot of stew simmered on the wood stove, filling the space with savory aromas that made her stomach growl. "Can you cook?" Travis asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. It sounded like I'm putting you right to work." "Cook," Elsie said, surprising herself by almost smiling. "I can also read, write, keep books, tend animals, and mend anything that needs mending. My father believed in educating daughters as well as sons." Travis nodded approvingly. "Good. I could use help with the books. Numbers and I have never been close friends." Over the next few days, they fell into an easy routine, Elsie discovered. That Travis was nothing like the rough cowboys who frequented the saloons in town. He was educated. He'd attended a seminary back east before deciding the ministry wasn't his calling, and he treated her with a respect she'd never experienced from men outside her family. She took over the cooking and household management, but Travis insisted on paying her a small wage beyond room and board. "The debt you're working off is between you and the creditors," he explained. "But your labor has value beyond that." In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Travis reading aloud from his collection of books, while Elsie mended clothes or worked on her embroidery. She began to notice things about him. How his face softened when he read poetry. How he always made sure she had the more comfortable chair. How he never made her feel like a burden despite his obvious poverty. 3 weeks after her arrival, Elsie was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching fast. Travis emerged from the barn, his face grim as he recognized the riders, Jaromir Cossack and 2 of his men from the neighboring ranch. Cossack was everything Travis wasn't: wealthy, crude, and entitled. He'd been one of the more aggressive bidders at Elsie's auction, and his expression when he saw her made her skin crawl. "Holloway," Cossack called out, not bothering to dismount. "I'm here to make you an offer. $500 for the girl. She's not for sale," Travis said quietly, moving to stand between Cossack and Elsie. Cossack laughed. "For sale, especially indentured servants. Paid $1 for her. I'm offering $500. That's good profit for anyone." Elsie felt her heart hammering as she watched Travis's face. $500 would solve all his financial problems. It would be the practical, sensible choice. "I said she's not for sale," Travis repeated, his hand resting casually near his gun belt. "Think carefully, Holloway. Winter's coming, and you've got bills to pay. That pretty little thing could keep you warm and make you rich at the same time." Insult hung in the air like smoke. Travis took a step forward, his voice deadly calm. "Cossack, you've got 10 seconds to get off my land before I forget my Christian upbringing." That night, Elsie couldn't sleep. She found Travis sitting on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. Without invitation, she settled into the chair beside him. "You could have taken his money," she said quietly. Travis was silent for a long moment. Didn't want to. Why not? $500 would change your life. He turned to look at her, moonlight catching in his storm-gray eyes. "Elsie, what kind of man would that make me? To buy your freedom just to sell you to someone like Cossack?" She studied his profile, feeling something warm and dangerous stirring in her chest. Most men would have taken the money. Then most men are fools. They sat in comfortable silence until Elsie finally spoke the words that had been building inside her for weeks. "Travis, I need to tell you something. The debt you bought, it's not as large as everyone thinks. My father was many things, but he was also clever. He hid most of his assets before he died." "I know where they are." Travis turned sharply. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I could pay off the debt tomorrow if I wanted to. I've been watching you, trying to understand what kind of man you really are." She met his gaze directly. "I could leave any time. I choose to stay." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Travis felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition of feelings he'd been trying to ignore. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because in 3 weeks, you've shown me more kindness and respect than most men show their wives. Because you read poetry aloud and make sure I have enough blankets. Because you turn down $500 rather than let someone treat me like property." She paused, gathering courage, "because I think I'm falling in love with you." Travis closed his eyes, fighting against the hope rising in his chest. "Elsie, you don't owe me anything. Gratitude isn't love. You think that's what this is?" She stood, moving to stand in front of him. "Travis Holloway, I've had plenty of men try to court me with pretty words and expensive gifts. Not one of them ever made me feel the way I do when you smile at me over breakfast." He stood slowly, his hands finding her waist as if drawn by magnetism. "And how do I make you feel? Safe, valued, like I matter beyond what I can give you?" She reached up to touch his face. "Like I could be happy for the rest of my life if I never left this little valley." Travis searched her eyes, looking for any sign that she didn't mean it, finding only sincerity. He lowered his head and kissed her, with all the tenderness he'd been holding back. When they broke apart, Elsie was smiling. "Now what, Mr. Holloway?" he said, his voice warm with possibility. "We figure out how to build a life together if you'll have me." "I'll have you," she said without hesitation. "But first, we need to talk about those hidden assets of my father's, 'cause I have plans for this ranch." Travis laughed, the sound rich and genuine. What kind of plans? It's the kind that involve making you the most prosperous rancher in Montana Territory, and the happiest. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Elsie was kneading bread when she heard multiple horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Judge Morrison from the territorial court, accompanied by Sheriff Dalton and two men she didn't recognize. Travis emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth, his expression wary. Official visits usually meant trouble in Cedar Ridge. "Mr. Holloway," Judge Morrison called out, dismounting with the stiffness of a man past 60. "We need to speak with you and Miss Brightwater about the circumstances of her indenture." Elsie dried her hands and stepped onto the porch beside Travis. One of the unknown men stepped forward, tall, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Miss Brightwater, I'm Attorney Nathaniel Cross from Helena. Been investigating your father's estate on behalf of the territorial government. It appears there may have been significant irregularities in the debt assessment that led to your sale." Elsie's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that suggests your father's creditors may have inflated their claims and hidden certain assets to force you into servitude," Cross said grimly. "We have evidence that suggests the actual debt was less than $50, not the $800 claimed." Judge Morrison nodded gravely. "These allegations prove true. Your indenture was based on fraudulent information. The sale would be invalid." Travis felt Elsie tense beside him. "What does that mean for her situation now?" "It means Miss Brightwater is a free woman, if she chooses to be," Sheriff Dalton said. "No debt, no obligation to anyone." Silence stretched out until Cross spoke again. "There's more. We've located additional assets belonging to your father, including a mining claim that's recently proven quite valuable. Miss Brightwater, you're likely one of the wealthiest unmarried women in the territory." Elsie stared at the attorney, feeling the weight of Travis's gaze beside her. Everything had just changed. She was no longer the desperate woman who'd been sold at auction, no longer dependent on anyone's charity or kindness. "How valuable?" she asked quietly. "Conservative estimate. $20,000? Possibly more?" Travis felt his world tilt. $20,000 was more money than most men in Montana would see in a lifetime. Elsie could have anything she wanted now, could go anywhere, do anything. Why would she stay with a struggling rancher who'd bought her with his last dollar? "I need time to think," Elsie said finally. "This is, a lot to process." After the officials left with promises to return in a few days for her answer, Elsie and Travis stood on the porch in uncomfortable silence. The easy intimacy of the previous evening felt fragile in light of this new reality. So Travis said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "You're free? And rich, it appears so. That changes things." Elsie turned to face him, seeing the walls he was already building behind his eyes. Does it change how you feel about me?" Travis ran a hand through his hair, struggling with emotions he didn't know how to name. "Elsie, yesterday you were a woman working off a debt. Today you're a woman who could buy half the county. How can that not change things?" "Because my feelings haven't changed," she said fiercely. "Have yours?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Travis wanted to say no, wanted to pull her into his arms and pretend nothing had changed, but the practical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through years of hardship, was already calculating the impossibilities. "People will say I'm after your money," he said quietly. "People will say a lot of things. I don't care what they say. You should. A woman with your resources. You could have any man you want. You could go to San Francisco, New York, anywhere. Why would you want to stay here with someone like me?" The hurt in Elsie's eyes made Travis's chest ache, but he forced himself to continue. "I bought you with my last dollar, Elsie. I'm not even sure I can make the mortgage payment this month." "So that's it?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the tears she was holding back. "Yesterday you kissed me and talked about building a life together. Today I find out I have money, and suddenly I'm too good for you." Travis closed his eyes, hating himself for the words he knew he had to say. "Maybe you always were." For 3 days they moved around each other like strangers. Travis threw himself into ranch work with desperate intensity, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. Elsie maintained the household with mechanical precision, her face a mask of polite indifference whenever their paths crossed. On the fourth morning, Elsie was gone. Travis found her note on the kitchen table, written in her careful script. Gone to Helena to settle affairs. Will send word about arrangements for the ranch. E. The emptiness hit him like a physical blow. He wandered through the cabin, touching things she'd arranged, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that lingered in her room. By evening, he was drunk on whiskey and self-recrimination. Jeremiah Cossack found him in that condition 3 days. Later, heard your pretty bird flew away, Cossack said, helping himself to a seat on Travis's porch. Can't say I'm surprised. Woman gets a taste of real money. She's not going to waste time on a dirt-poor cowboy. Travis said nothing, staring. Out at the empty pasture where his cattle grazed. I also heard she's planning to sell this place, Cossack continued. Shame, really? You put a lot of work into it? Of course I might be interested in buying if the price is right. Get off my land, Travis said quietly. Now that's not very neighborly, especially since it might not be your land much longer. Cossack's smile was predatory. Word is, your mortgage payment's overdue. Bank's getting nervous. It was true. Without Elsie's help with the books and household management, Travis had fallen behind on everything. He'd received 2 notices from the bank, each one more threatening than the last. Tell you what, Cossack said, standing. When you're ready to be reasonable, you know where to find me. I'll give you fair value for the cattle and equipment. After Cossack left, Travis sat on his porch until dawn, wrestling with the realization that he'd destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him out of wounded pride and fear. Meanwhile, in Helena, Elsie was discovering that wealth came with its own complications. Attorney Cross had been conservative in his estimates. Her father's mining claim was worth closer to $40,000, making her one of the richest women in the territory. She'd taken rooms at the finest hotel, bought new clothes, and fielded marriage proposals from men she'd never met. But none of it filled the ache in her chest when she thought about Travis, alone on his ranch, too proud to fight for what they'd had. Miss Brightwater, her lawyer said during one of their meetings, I've prepared the documents you requested. Are you certain about this course of action? Elsie studied the papers spread across the mahogany table. I'm certain. How long before everything is in place? A few days at most, though I feel compelled to ask her. You sure this man is worth such a dramatic gesture? Elsie smiled for the first time in days. Mr. Cross. He bought me with his last dollar, when he could have let someone else take me, turned down $500 rather than sell me to a man who would have used me badly. He treated me with more respect and kindness than I've ever known from anyone outside my family. She paused, her voice growing soft. Yes, he's worth it. Back in Cedar Ridge, Travis was loading his few possessions into his wagon when Sheriff Dalton arrived with an official-looking envelope. Foreclosure notice, Travis asked grimly. Don't think so, Dalton said, studying the expensive paper and wax seal. This came from Helena. Looks important. Travis tore open the envelope, his hands shaking slightly as he read the contents. Then he read them again, certain he was misunderstanding something. Problem? Dalton asked, noting Travis's pale complexion. Travis looked up from the papers, his voice hoarse with emotion. Someone just paid off my mortgage and bought the neighboring section of land and deposited $5,000 in my name at the bank. He swallowed hard. It's all been transferred to joint ownership between me and ... Elsie Brightwater. In the distance, dust clouds announced an approaching carriage. As it grew closer, Travis could see a familiar figure in the passenger seat, her auburn hair catching the sunlight like fire. Elsie had come home. Travis stood frozen as the elegant carriage pulled up to his cabin, watching Elsie step down with the grace of a woman accustomed to fine things. She wore an emerald green dress that probably cost more than his cattle, but her eyes held the same mixture of determination and vulnerability he'd fallen in love with. Miss Brightwater, Sheriff Dalton tipped his hat respectfully. Welcome back. You, Sheriff. Elsie's gaze never left Travis. Could we have a moment alone, please? Dalton nodded and headed back toward town, leaving them facing each other across a gulf that seemed both infinite and fragile. You paid my mortgage, Travis said finally, among other things. Elsie lifted her chin in that familiar gesture of defiance. I also bought the Henderson place next door, hired contractors to expand the house, and arranged for 100 head of prime breeding cattle to be delivered next week. Travis stared at her, overwhelmed. Elsie, I can't. Can't what? She interrupted. Can't accept help from someone who cares about you? Can't admit that maybe, just maybe, we're better together than apart? You don't understand, Travis said, his voice rough with emotion. People will say that I'm a foolish woman who's bought herself a husband. Elsie stepped closer, her green eyes flashing. That you're a fortune hunter who charmed a lonely heiress. That we're both crazy for thinking love matters more than what other people think. Travis felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. Something like that, good, Elsie said firmly. Let them talk. I spent the last week in Helena, being courted by respectable men who see dollar signs when they look at me. Not one of them made me feel the way I felt when you read poetry to me by the fire. Not one of them would have given up his last dollar for a stranger's dignity. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded document. This is a partnership. Agreement, Travis. 50-50 ownership of everything, the ranch, the cattle, the mining interests, all of it. I'm not offering to buy you or support you. I'm offering to build something together as equals. Travis took the papers with shaking hands, scanning the legal language that made their partnership official. Why, he asked quietly. Because 3 weeks ago, a man I barely knew treated me like I was worth more than the price paid for me. Because he showed me what it feels like to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. Because when he kissed me, I felt like I was home for the first time in my life. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the tears she was fighting back. Because I love you, Travis Holloway. It's not your pride, not your poverty, not some romantic ideal you. The man who reads Shakespeare aloud and makes sure I have enough blankets and would rather lose everything than compromise his principles. Travis set the papers aside and cupped her face in his calloused hands. I was scared, he admitted. Scared that you'd realize you could do better. Scared that I wasn't worthy of what you were offering. And now I think I was an idiot. He kissed her softly, tasting salt from her tears. I think maybe we were meant to find each other in that dusty auction barn. So you'll sign the partnership agreement? Travis smiled, the expression transforming his face. On one condition, Elsie raised an eyebrow. What condition? Marry me first. Not you as my wife, not just my business partner. Duh. Travis Holloway, Elsie said, laughing through her tears. Are you proposing to me? I'm proposing to the woman who saw something worth saving in a broke cowboy. I'm proposing to the woman who's brave enough to risk everything on love. I'm proposing to my equal, my partner, my heart. He dropped to one knee right there in the dusty yard. Elsie Brightwater, will you marry me? Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. As Travis swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy, neither noticed Jeremiah Kozak watching from the ridge above. His expression was ugly as he wheeled his horse around and headed back toward town. Some men, it seemed, didn't take kindly to losing what they thought should have been theirs. The wedding took place. 2 weeks later, in the small church at Cedar Ridge, with half the county in attendance, Elsie wore her mother's ivory silk dress, altered to fit perfectly, while Travis wore a new black suit that made him look every inch the prosperous rancher he was becoming. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony, and even Sheriff Dalton was spotted wiping his eyes when Travis and Elsie exchanged vows they'd written themselves. The celebration afterwards spilled out of the church and into the streets, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed everyone twice over. As the evening wound down and the guests began to head home, Travis and Elsie stood on the porch of their expanded house, watching the last of the wagons disappear into the distance. The new wing was nearly finished, with a proper parlor, a larger kitchen, and upstairs bedrooms for the children they hoped to have. Mrs. Holloway, Travis said, testing out the name.
I like the sound of that,
Elsie replied, leaning into his warmth. Any regrets about giving up the fancy hotels in Helena? Elsie looked out over their valley, where the new cattle grazed peacefully in pastures that stretched as far as the eye could see. Not a single one. I do. though I do have a confession to make. Travis raised an eyebrow. Another secret? I may have slightly understated our assets, she said with a mischievous smile. The mining claim is producing even better than expected. We're going to be very wealthy, Travis. Define very wealthy. Rich enough to buy half of Montana territory. If we wanted to, rich enough to never worry about money again. Rich enough to be generous with our good fortune. Travis shook his head in amazement. A year ago I was counting pennies, and now, ... Now you're married to a woman who loves you more than all the gold in the territory, Elsie finished. Money is just a tool, Travis. What matters is what we do with it. As if summoned by her words, they heard horses approaching fast, too fast for a social call. Travis instinctively moved in front of Elsie as 3 riders emerged from the darkness. Jeremiah Cossack and 2 of his men, all of them armed. Oh well, Cossack called out, his words slurred with whiskey. If it isn't the happy couple, you had quite a celebration. You're drunk. Cossack, Travis said calmly. Go home and sleep it off. Don't think I will. Cossack dismounted unsteadily, his hand resting on his gun. See, I've been thinking about this situation, about how a poor cowboy suddenly married himself a fortune, about how that should have been my fortune if things had gone differently. At the auction, the bidding was fair and legal, Elsie said firmly. You lost. Accept it and move on. Cossack's laugh was ugly. Fair? There was nothing fair about it. I had money to spend, and you chose this. There's nobody over a man who could have given you everything. He did give me everything, Elsie replied. Gave me love, respect, and a partnership built on trust. What were you offering? Your money in exchange for treating me like property? The insult hit home, and Cossack's face darkened. You think you're too good for me? You're just a farmer's daughter who got lucky? And him? He gestured contemptuously at Travis. He's nothing but a charity case you've dressed up in fancy clothes. That's enough, Travis said, his voice deadly. Quiet. You've said your piece. Now get off our land. Or what? Cossack drew his gun, holding it loosely at his side. You'll make me? You and what army, poor boy? The situation was escalating fast, and Travis could see Cossack's men fingering their weapons nervously. But before he could respond, the sound of multiple riders approached from the other direction. Sheriff Dalton and 3 deputies emerged. Into the moonlight, all armed and ready. Problem here? Dalton asked mildly, though his hand rested on his gun butt. Cossack looked around, suddenly realizing he was outnumbered and outgunned. No problem, Sheriff. Just paying my respects to the newlyweds. That's neighborly of you, Dalton said. Of course, it's kind of late for social calls. You boys look like you've been drinking. We were just leaving, one of Cossack's men said nervously. Good idea, Dalton agreed. Mr. Cossack, I'll be riding escort to make sure you get home safely. Wouldn't want any accidents on a dark road. After the men rode away under the sheriff's watchful eye, Travis and Elsie stood alone under the stars. The confrontation had shaken them both, but it had also proven something important. He'll try again, Elsie said quietly. Maybe, but next time we'll be ready. Travis pulled her closer. Besides, we have friends now. People who care about what happens to us. When did that happen? Elsie asked, marveling at the thought. When we stopped hiding and started living, Travis replied. When we proved that love matters more than money or status or what other people think we deserve. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out over the valley that was truly theirs now. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and the stream murmured its ancient song. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities they could hardly imagine. So what's next for the Holloways? Elsie asked. Travis smiled, the expression full of love and contentment. Everything. We're going to raise cattle and children, expand the ranch, maybe start a school for the local kids. We're going to be pillars of this community and show everyone what a real partnership looks like. And if people say, you married me for my money, then they don't know me very well, Travis said, kissing her temple. I married you because you're the bravest, kindest, most stubborn woman I've ever met. The money is just a bonus, answer. Elsie said, laughing. Now take me inside, husband. We have the rest of our lives to start living. As they walked into their home together, Travis reflected on the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, he'd been a struggling rancher with barely enough money to survive. Today, he was a wealthy man married to his equal in every way. That mattered. He bought Elsie with his last dollar and never looked back. Looking at her now, glowing with happiness in the lamplight of their parlor, he knew it was the best investment he'd ever made. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of all their tomorrows.